Welcome back, everybody. This is Todd Sylvester with the Todd Sylvester Inspired Belief Cast. Once again, I have an amazing guest. Her name is Melanie Tackett. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you on today. I want to also thank once again our sponsor, Veracity Networks. They're an amazing company, telecommunication company. They help take companies' informations and basically put it into the cloud. They're booming. They're worldwide now. And my good friend Drew Peterson, who's the owner and founder of that amazing company. And I want to thank them for sponsoring this podcast, Beliefcast, today. And then again, I want to thank all the people who have downloaded these podcasts and are listening to it and sharing it. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly amazing. And so thank you so much for your support. You know, a little bit about our amazing guest today. Her name's Melanie Tackett, like I said. She's an ASUDC substance abuse counselor. She has completed the substance abuse program through the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Utah. She currently works as the Director of Admissions at Wasatch Recovery. We're colleagues. I get to work with Melanie a lot. She has an incredible story. She's been in recovery for 33 years, which is amazing in itself. But what's even more amazing when you hear the things that she's gone through, the things that the trials, the tribulations, you name it, and to be able to get past that and to be 33 years past that's truly remarkable. And so I'm excited for our listeners to hear your story today.
Wow, I'm excited and just full of, I'm a little anxious, but I think that's a good anxiousness.
Could we say excitement?
Excitement's good.
Yeah, because I think you're excited. We talked about it before. Yeah,
you're right. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I know you. There's a lot to your story, and there's probably some things that maybe you won't share, and that's okay too. But I do know that your story is going to reach thousands and thousands of people, and they're going to be inspired by you. And so, again, like I said, I'm excited that you're willing to actually be on here. So let's start. Maybe tell us a little bit about your family and where you grew up. And
okay.
Yeah.
To start with, I think, and let me tell you,
Yeah.
I just want to thank you again. I'm so grateful to be here. I think
welcome.
sharing, with people out here is so important because there's so many people that don't talk about what's going on in their life. Yeah. And I think the reason my story, people go, oh, your story is so amazing. It's like, well, I have 33 years of recovery to share. And I don't really talk. I don't talk about it as much, and I don't see as many women in recovery long term. It's crazy. Yeah. But and I want to meet more.
Sure.
So
well, maybe this will open up the floodgates for that. That'd be awesome.
So thought I'd throw that out there because maybe I will meet more.
Yeah.
I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm 57 years old.
Right on.
My parents were from small towns.
Okay.
Alpine. My mother was from. She had 11 brothers and sisters.
Oh, wow.
My dad had 9, and a very strong religious family. We moved to Bountiful when I was 3 years old, and I had a brother that was 7 years older than me.
Okay.
And he actually passed away when he was 29. And he was born with diabetes. They caught it when he was like 2 or 3.
Okay.
And he just, back then, they didn't have all the technology that they do now. They didn't have all the ways to treat it.
Yeah.
And, he was constantly having problems, and his eyesight was going bad, and he had problems with his fingers and toes, and, he got married and had 2 beautiful children. Yeah. And then suddenly his kidneys failed, and they were doing dialysis, and he actually just threw a blood clot, and it killed him. It was just like nobody expected it. So
you're 22 at this time?
I was actually, I was 22.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it, so backing up, growing up, it was just me and my brother, and we were 7 years apart. And so we had different friends.
And so it was just you two, no other siblings?
No other siblings.
And the reason why I'm a little caught off guard, because, your mom and dad both came from these large families. And maybe they're like, man, we're not doing this.
Right.
But so you're 7 years apart. And so were you close to your brother growing up?
He protected me in a lot of ways because I was just like the little sister.
Right.
But in other ways, we weren't so close because he had older friends and he was dating and here I am still a kid. And I think because there was a lot going on in our family. He was planned. I wasn't.
Right.
So hence the 7 years apart. My mom was told she wouldn't be able to have any more children. And yeah. And then she was in her 40s when she had me.
Okay.
So, so having parents that were older and being younger, and then having a brother that was older.
Right.
It was kind of like I felt alone a lot. My mom and dad really brought a strong faith into our home that, they believed in, and we practiced and attended, and it was the LDS church. And the only problem was that my dad wasn't really living what he was practicing.
Oh, gotcha.
And that he was wanting us to practice.
Okay.
And he had a very bad temper, and he would beat my brother a lot, and he would beat my mother a lot, and very, very bad verbal abuse.
Right.
And
how young were you when you noticed and saw these things? How young were you?
Like 2 and 3.
Okay, so
I mean,
as
right
early
out
as you
the
can
gate.
remember.
Right out the gate. Okay. And there was always friction going on in the home, and my mom was like the peacemaker. And so she really strongly believed in her faith. I really think that's what helped her get through a lot of stuff.
Sure.
And back in those days, it was just like you don't leave. You don't break your marriage up.
Yeah, you stick it out.
You stick it out, and you're kind of taught to. Yeah. We were taught to kind of you stick through things, and there were some really bad things that both my brother and I did experience, and my mom, it did wear on her, and it was really good that she had her sisters and her brothers. She was very close to them, and they lived in Alpine, and she would pack us up in the car, and we'd go to Alpine for the weekend and stay with our aunts and uncles and go horseback riding, and they lived on farms, and and we just do farm life. It was just such a great escape.
Oh, I bet.
And the only thing was that she was the middle towards the youngest in her family, and so they were dying quickly,
right?
Because they were getting older.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, I have one aunt alive that's in her 90s, early 90s, and out of all of them, they're gone. And I think I've got 2 uncles on my dad's side, but there's no contact.
Okay.
Yeah. And my dad's passed away. So my mom and dad have both passed away as well.
Okay.
But we would go to church every Sunday, and then we'd come home and fight and argue. And we do know now that my dad actually had an addiction.
Okay.
He had heart problems.
You didn't know that until later?
No.
Okay.
No. He had heart problems, and he had a cardiac arrest in his early 70s. I think it was late 60s. Maybe it was late 60s. And they started him all kinds of medications, including, put him on Xanax and Valium and different kinds of pills besides heart pills. And, he was abusing them down the road. But, to back up, I started, and I don't know if it was just because of the things that were going on at home, but I didn't know how to cope with things that were going on at home. And I rebelled. I was the I was the scapegoat in the family, kind of.
Yeah.
And so I kind of acted out a lot. And I want to say I was probably 6 or 7 years old when I started abusing food.
Okay.
So I started
as a way to kind of comfort yourself.
Yeah. You know, there would be, you know, my dad would be yelling and my mom would be crying, and what happened was the neighbors weren't even allowed to have their kids come to my house because my dad was so loud that my friends' parents could hear them. And
they'd be like, "You're not going down."
Yeah, they wouldn't allow them to come over. And so I felt like I'm like, what's wrong? You know, why can't they come play with me?
Yeah.
And now I get it now. But then as a little kid, you don't understand. So I turned to food, and I used food to comfort and to help me sleep, to calm my nerves.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, by kindergarten, I was the heaviest girl in kindergarten.
Right.
And was being made fun of at school because I was so overweight. And of course I didn't like that. And so my mom, you know, hauled me off to Weight Watchers when I was probably 9 years old.
Really? Okay.
Oh yeah. Just, you know, trying to help me, and and I was going to lose weight and I was going to look good. And finally by 6th grade, I had decided that when I entered into junior high, I was going to look good. And so I went on a really strict diet. I hung a dress on the wall that was like this teeny dress. And I'm like, I'm going to wear this dress.
And I visualize I will be in that.
I'm going to wear this dress to junior high school. And when I went into junior high school, I had lost a bunch of weight.
Okay.
And it was really crazy, but I became very popular very fast.
Yeah.
And
you're like, man, this is great.
Yeah.
I'm thin. I feel great.
And I
got
was getting
friends
good.
now.
Yeah, I was getting good grades too. I was getting good grades.
Yeah.
I had friends. And the big thing was, you know, I was starting to be noticed by boys.
Right.
And I wasn't getting a whole lot of attention at home, and I was getting validated. And so I started turning to boys.
Yeah.
And remember thinking how cool it was that, you know, I'd be walking home from school with one of the boys, and, you know, here I am in 7th grade and thinking this is awesome. And
right.
Yes.
Sure.
So during that time, my dad got really, really sick, and they went into the hospital. He was in the hospital a lot, but he'd go into the hospital several times with his heart.
Okay.
And but then when he'd come out, in between, you know, my mom was kind of the caretaker, but at the same time, he would like be so verbally abusive to her that I don't know why I did what I did. I'm just looking at the situation that I grew up in, but I started stealing pills from my dad. Yeah, out of his cupboard.
And you're still in junior high at this time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like this, it was by 8th grade.
Really?
I started stealing pills. And then I hooked up with some friends that were starting to slough and get in trouble. And things were so bad. And I'll give one description, but and I'm sure that, you know, I've talked about this before, that I remember standing in the hall and my mom said move, and I moved back in because I was in like a doorway that went into my bedroom, and I backed up because my dad was throwing a drawer. He had pulled a drawer out of the dresser and was throwing it down the hall. And, you know, I backed up and he was throwing it at my mom. And, you know, and there were times, and I shared this before, it makes me really sad, but and my mom had shared this, and she didn't ever want to talk about it, but where he would try to choke her, and, you know, he would pull her up the stairs by her neck, and he would pull the phones out of the walls. Really? And tell her to go to the dungeon.
Was he ever that way towards you? Where, I mean, because your brother, you said, you know,
he was
got physically
towards
hurt
my brother,
but not towards you.
But what had happened was my brother became physically violent as well.
Okay. So he started fighting back.
So he started fighting back. But then my brother, he did hit me a couple of times. Mm-hmm. But his was more, it turned to where he would protect me, but yeah, I would get verbally abused by him. Right. And my dad didn't physically hit me, but he would verbally tell me that, and this I went to years of therapy for this. Sure. I mean, it would be like, I'd hear him fighting with my mom, and he'd say, she's been a problem since the day she was born. And, so whenever something was going on, it would be like, that Melanie.
Really? Well,
and then I'd act it out.
Well, yeah, it's almost like you hear this as a kid and you're thinking, I'm the problem. Maybe that's why they're fighting.
Well, yeah, I did. I thought I was the problem. I really did. I thought something must be really wrong with me because my dad, is so mad at me, and he just despises me. Right. And so I started sloughing and taking his pills, and here I am. We had just opened up a high school from junior high, so we got to go over to the high school in 9th grade. Right. So we had 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th in our high school. And I went over to 9th grade, and I was using the drugs and hanging out with people that were probably 4, 5, 6 years older than me. A group of our girls had met some guys that were just finishing high school or out of high school that were into drinking and drugs that we started hanging out with. And my dad was not happy at all about that. Right. It was just one more thing. And one morning I'm walking to school and to high school, and I'm with my friends, and it's like 7:30 in the morning, and we go down under the underpass, and I look up, and my friend that's with me, she's like, there's your dad. I'm like, what? And then we look across the street, and there's my dad in his car, because he would leave really, really early every morning. Right. And we thought he'd go drink coffee or whatever, because that was one of the things that he did. Right. And he was getting a woman out of his car and putting her on a bus. Mm. And I was just like, what the heck? Yeah. And it was at that time that I actually went home to my mom afterwards, and I said that I had seen this, and she shared with me, which I knew earlier, but I didn't really put everything together, that my dad had, when my mom was pregnant with me, my dad actually had an affair. Okay. In their old ward in Rose Park. Okay. And got a woman pregnant. Mm. It was in their study group. Okay. And he was, her husband was a mailman, and my mom worked for the state of Utah. And so they would see each other while my mom was at work. Okay. And my dad worked nights at that time. Okay. And so,
is this the same woman that he was putting on the bus?
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess my brother actually had caught them one time when we were living in Rose Park. Okay. And she got pregnant. And at that time with the church courts, I don't even know how it all worked out. Some of this I've read in paper from after my mom died that she had hid, and other stuff that she had told me, but they had like a court hearing, and my dad promised that he would not see this woman anymore, and that they would move and start their life over. Right. And we moved to Bountiful. Okay. And that this couple, that this woman and her husband would raise this baby as their own. So I have a half sister that is close to my age that I've never met.
Still never met her, really?
Never met.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And when I confronted my dad about what was going on, that I had seen him that morning, he just looked at me and he says, it did not. This is none of your business. And I mean, he got really loud and boisterous, and you stay out of my business, and you're nothing but a problem. And hence after all of this, I just started spitting out. I mean, I just started drinking and doing drugs, and I was doing experimental drugs, and I was sloughing school, and my dad's like, we need to, we can't control her. So I did do I went to some party, and I don't remember it, but I woke up 3 days later, and I was in it was a place called Moeda, and it was like a youth detention.
Oh, okay.
And my dad wouldn't come get me. He didn't want me to come out. So they kept me there for a week. And then they decided to put me in a foster home.
Really?
Because my parents felt I was ungovernable.
Okay. How old were you at this time when they decided to do that?
13.
13? Okay.
14.
Yeah.
Between 13 and 14.
And I can imagine as a young girl at that age, hearing this is what we're doing, the message that sent to you. Mm-hmm. It probably reinforced the belief you already had is I'm the problem. What's wrong with me? I'm not good enough. Now this on top of it.
Right.
I can't even imagine what was going through your mind.
I just was really confused, and I always had anxiety, and I always had stomach aches.
Yeah.
I was just really confused. I didn't know what to think. And so after, I think I was there for a couple of months, I came back home.
Right.
And I went back to school, but I didn't want to stay in school, and I didn't want to stay at my parents'. And
sure, yeah. Why would you?
It was like, And I remember every time they'd go somewhere, I would have this anxiety and this fear, like, are they going to come home? Am I going to be here by myself? It was just a weird feeling.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what that was all about. Just,
And at this time, your brother's kind of moved out.
My brother's kind of
on,
like doing his own thing, and he's hanging out with, his friends, and he's dating, and he's really active in the church. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing the opposite.
Right.
And then he decided to go on a mission.
Oh, okay.
So his girlfriend waited for him. Yeah. So his girlfriend waited for him while he was on his mission. So he went on a mission, and while he was on his mission, things got worse at home.
Because now it's just you there.
It's just me and my dad and my mom, and my dad knows that I know too much, and he had committed to my mother and the church and everybody else that he would never see this woman, and I have evidence that he's still seeing her.
Still seeing her. Oh,
and
wow.
this is years down the road, because I was 3 years old when we moved from Rose Park, and so I'm going to high school when I see him. So that opens up a whole nother rat's nest.
Yeah.
And I just remember. And it's really funny, Todd, but I looked the other day, and I was going through stuff because I'm doing some remodeling in my house, and I found a card that I had written to my mom, and I was only 15 years old. And I had written to her saying how much I loved her and that it was really hard, but, I was going to do things that she would never understand, and there were things that I could never tell her, and that I was, even if I wasn't there with them, that I loved her. And I remember reading that just the other day.
Really?
And it brought up all those feelings again of like,
wow.
What's going on?
Yeah.
And now I know, what's going on. But so while my brother's gone, I took off. I took off. I met a guy that was 4 years older than me. And he was in love with me.
Right. Who wouldn't be? Come on.
I mean, he was in love with me, and I didn't know what love was. But I'm like, someone's in love with me, and
that
he was
felt,
at
you
that
felt
time,
wanted, you felt needed, you felt accepted.
He's just getting out of high school, and I'm just like, he's got, back in the 70s, it's like he's got long hair, and he's dark, and I'm just like, oh man, I really love this guy, and he introduced me to a lot of different drugs, and he introduced me to actually getting into making and selling marijuana, and we'd buy pounds of marijuana, and he would lace them with different drugs and sell them. And I ran away with him. And he took me across border into another state.
Okay.
And while I was there, of course, now the family's got the police involved, and they're trying to find out where I'm at. And I ran away for a couple months. And during that time, this guy that I was with became verbally abusive and physically abusive to me, to the point that I was being knocked out at times.
Really?
And I actually called a girlfriend that came up and stayed with us. And he put us up in a hotel, and he was staying with his uncle and aunt and working up there. And I started really drinking out. I was drinking a lot into blackouts. I don't even remember things, Todd. There were things I don't remember that happened because I was doing at such a young age. Here I am, drinking tequila and different things into total blackouts, and not remembering things. The things that I do remember were being at parties with him and his friends. And then we're riding in a truck up, like four-wheeling, and it's at night, and I'm drinking, and he puts me in the back of the truck and tells the guys that they can have me.
Really?
And I'm crying and I'm screaming, but I don't remember if anything happened or not.
Yeah. How old were you again at this time,
At this time, I was 14.
14 years old. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And here you are going through all this, and you're dating a guy that's just like your dad, actually.
Yeah.
In the sense of he's abusing you.
That's
and
exactly.
Physically and verbally.
And telling me the exact same things that my mom would tell, or my dad would tell my mom. And telling me that things aren't real, that are real. And that's what my dad would always do, is that's not true. That's not true.
Right.
She's lying, And so I grew up in that kind of an environment. And then I went with this abusive relationship, and I came home from, long story short, I came home from running away, and I was 4 months pregnant. And I had to get married. And the reason I had to get married was because my dad had said, if you don't marry him, we're going to press charges for statutory rape.
Oh, gotcha.
Because he took you across the state line.
Okay.
And so I married him, and he did not want to be married to me. So the beatings continued. When I was pregnant, he put a pillow over my face. He punched me in the stomach. He tried to abort and telling me I didn't deserve to be a mom.
Wow.
And he wanted me to give up the baby. And I don't know why, but I just really felt strongly that I wanted to keep the child.
Yeah.
And here I am, this young kid, thinking that I know what I'm doing, and I kept the child. And we were only married for 6 months. My brother did rescue us. He got beat up by my ex-husband. I guess I would call him my ex-husband.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
6 months.
So he beat up your brother?
He beat up my brother.
Oh, okay.
My brother came and moved me out, and he blocked my brother in and just started beating up my brother, and my brother helped me get out and away from him. And then I went on welfare.
What a good brother.
Yeah.
I mean, that he was there to help. Like you said, he was a protector.
He was mad at me.
Right.
But he protected, but he was mad at me.
Sure.
Because of the life
that you were
style I was living.
Right.
And I went into an apartment, I lied and said I was 18. And got a job up at the state of Utah, and started working in Department of Finance in key punching. I was a key punch operator.
Oh, really?
Back in the day.
Back in the day.
And so during that time, my ex-husband continued to harass me. He would come over, break into my house, tear up my furniture. He cut my tires on my car, cut all the hoses on my car, but I could never prove it was him, because we couldn't catch him.
Never caught him.
Come in, one time he busted into my house and held me down and put everything up against the door and was going to kill me. And the neighbors upstairs, we were in a fourplex. The neighbors upstairs called the police, and they came in and pulled him off and hauled him off to jail.
Wow.
So, yeah. So here I am raising a child now, and I'm an alcoholic, and I'm mainly, I was into alcohol.
Right.
But I'm trying to keep my act together. My dad would not let me come home.
Right.
So I decided to go back to a young mother's program up at Kaysville and get my education and get my diploma. And then I went into a secretarial school and learned how to be a secretary.
Right.
And that's how I started working.
Okay.
And went back to my high school with my boy, my baby, and got my driver's license.
Really? Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I look at that, and that was a really hard situation. That was hard to do.
For sure.
And it was, so I'm going to go up ahead of time because I know. So I got really bad with the alcohol, and I got a call one night, and it was the middle of the night, and then someone come knocking on my door, and it was my neighbor, and she had come over and told me that my brother had passed away, and that she was here to take me to the hospital to go meet my parents.
Was that a shock, or did you know that his health had been going down?
We didn't know he was going to die.
So it was
Nobody
a shock.
did, because he was getting dialysis treatments until they could, do a transplant or what. Yeah, right. But he threw a blood clot, so he was going like twice a week or 3 times a week and getting dialysis. Okay. But and I was just like in shock. And so she took me down there. I walked into the hospital. It's the middle of the night. My dad's in there, and I started to cry and just was like broke down. And I remember my dad just saying, "Get up off the floor, and quit your crying. You're going to wake everybody up." That's my dad. And I was just like, and he's like, and then, saying goodbye to my brother. And it was at that time within that year that I decided I needed to get some help.
Right.
I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And it was really weird because my dad, they didn't think that I needed help. And I don't know why they didn't think I needed to go get help.
Right.
But they didn't think I needed help. They thought I could just go to church and I would be fine. And, that it was just my emotions. And, if I could just go to church and get my emotions under control, I would be fine.
Okay.
I would be great.
Yeah.
And so I actually had moved into another apartment, and because of my drinking, I had gotten a DUI. I had lost my job. My car was going to get repossessed. And I get emotional every time I tell this story, but I woke up one morning, and my oldest son, was laying on the floor in the kitchen, and he was eating cereal with water. Wow. And I couldn't handle it.
Right.
It was just... And I didn't know what to do because my parents didn't know what to do, so nobody knew what to do.
Right.
And so I got my son in the car, and I took him up to my parents' neighborhood, and I let him out. Mm-hmm. And I says, "I want you to go play with your friends. And then go over to Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Right.
But I want you to stay here and play with the friends up in the neighborhood." And I went back home, and I went to my cupboard, and I got 2 big bottles of pills because they had me on antidepressants and different pills trying to help me. That doesn't mix well with alcohol, by the way.
Sure.
And
right.
And I was going to take him. I was just so close. I had him in my hand. I was going to take him, and somebody knocked on the door, and it was a bishop. And my son had gone right over to my parents, and my parents had set their bishop down in my house. And I opened the door, and I just fell apart. And I says, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's wrong, but I can't live like this.
Right.
And he says, "I know what's wrong with you." And I'm like, "You do?" And he's like, "Yeah, I do. And I'm going to take you to get some help." And I thought at that time that he was going to take me to the funny farm.
Right.
Because that's what they do.
Right.
And, I didn't know anything. I didn't know what was really wrong. I just thought, oh my gosh, they're going to put me away.
Yeah, they're going to lock me up.
They're going to lock me up and put me away.
Right.
And he put me in his car and he drove me to Highland Ridge Hospital.
Mm.
And it was the only residential place for alcohol at the time.
Right. Yeah, back then, for sure.
And he looked at me and he said, my dad was an alcoholic and he died of alcoholism. So he knew, the bishop knew what it looked like.
Yep.
And he knew what to do with me.
Yeah.
And my parents they didn't come see me in treatment at all. My dad didn't want anything to do with it. And he was that way. When my son was born, he didn't want anything to do with him till I was a little bit older.
Yeah.
He didn't want anything to do with me. So I went to treatment. And after I got out of treatment, I was sober about a year. And I woke up one morning and I had like a flashback. Mm-hmm. And it was just another devastation. I had a flashback and I remembered being with my dad. And that
Really?
my dad had, he was messing around with me in the bathtub. And I was like 3 and 4 years old. From like 3 to 5.
And you didn't remember that?
I didn't remember any of that.
Really?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
And it was just like I woke up and it was like clear as day. And
Really?
I remembered it. And I got sick to my stomach and I wanted to kill myself because I would rather die than believe that something like that could happen to me.
Sure.
Or accuse
right.
my father of something bad.
Right.
And so I went to my counselor at Highland Ridge and they put me back in the hospital for like 7 days and for free.
Really?
And worked with me.
Just knowing that we need to process through some of this.
And then told me that it was common that sometimes, these things would pop up. And then everything started making sense about not wanting to be in the house and wanting to be away. And, and then I told my mom about it. And the first thing my mom said to me was that she, what was the exact word? She says, I'm not surprised.
Really?
So, then I confronted my dad about it. And my mom went to the temple a couple weeks later and came home, and my dad had taken 3 bottles of pills and had tried to kill himself.
After you had confronted him?
Yeah.
Wow.
And 3 bottles like Xanax and Valium and some other
How
bottle.
did you handle that? I mean, you tell him this.
So then my mom tells me, you shouldn't have told him.
So now it's your fault.
So now it's my fault.
Wow.
And so he's up at the hospital in intensive care for a month. Then they put him in the substance abuse program at the hospital, and he leaves. And, I there was just so many things. That was kind of my roller coaster ride, and I'm staying clean and sober. So I left the state, and I took my son, and we went to California. And I got really involved in AA and got really involved in the meetings. And
how old is your son at this time when you went to California?
At this time, he's like 11, 12.
Okay. And how is he handling all this?
He's not handling... Well, then, he seemed to be handling things well.
Right.
He liked being at the beach. I drug him to the meetings. He was always... This kid went to I was going to meetings every day.
Right.
And I took him to meetings, and they'd feed him, and they'd give him goodies, and
sure, yeah,
and then we'd go out to beach meetings because I was living right on the coast.
Right.
So he was exposed to some fun stuff, but that was the life, and he seemed to be doing okay. I came back because my dad was dying after a couple of years. They said that my dad was really bad, and my mom asked me if I would move back home, and I did move back home.
Was that a tough decision, though? I mean...
It was a really tough decision, but this is the thing, when you're in this kind of position that I was in, I always felt like my feelings weren't as important. I needed to be there.
Right.
And I thought, well, maybe my dad will love me now because I'm going to come home and I'm going to help him. And so I always had those weird things that I would think. Mm-hmm. And so I came home and continued to stay clean and sober. I remarried. My dad, I adopted a baby at birth.
Okay.
So here's my other son that's 19, 18, going on a mission, and I just started over.
Now you got a baby.
And now I got a baby at birth. And then he, while he was out on his mission, I was raising my son. Mm-hmm. And when he came back, my son has always had, the resentments towards me started before my son went on a mission. Mm-hmm. And all the things from the way that he was raised, he really started having a hard time with.
Right.
And he did not like that I kept him. I mean, he did not like that I did not adopt him out. He was very upset with me that I did not adopt him out, mm-hmm. that he was exposed to, living in single trailers and no money and, welfare and me being gone and going to school. And
eating cereal with water.
He was really, and and I did take him to a lot of counseling as I was growing up, but he could not let go of that.
Right.
That was something that has always stuck with him, and to this day has still stuck with him.
Wow.
And that was a hard thing to deal with. So when he came home, he was mad at me for something before he went on his mm-hmm. mission. Oh, because I had another baby and I shouldn't.
Right.
Because I don't know how to take care of kids.
Right.
And then when he got home, he married within a year his mission president's daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then, had a family and have 5 grandchildren. And I raised my other son and ended up getting divorced and staying clean and sober, continuing to work on myself, continuing to work on things, going back to school.
Let's jump back just a little. When did your father pass away?
My dad,
was he still alive up to this point?
My dad passed away when my youngest son was 5 years old.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So he was still, when you adopted
mm-hmm.
the baby, he's on
mm-hmm.
his mission, comes back, gets
mm-hmm.
married. Your dad's still alive.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
And my youngest son was like a little over 1 year old when he came home from his mission.
Right. Okay.
So, put things in perspective.
Right. So,
my older son continued to build resentments, and we just, no matter what, we would try to work things out, and it just, so I'm just going to say, to this day, my son has chose, and it's serving him in his highest good, and I have to remember that.
Yeah.
To not be a part of my life.
Okay.
And he and his wife do not want me to be a part of my grandchildren. So I don't know my grandchildren.
That's tough.
Used to.
Yeah.
I used to know at least the 3 girls.
Right.
But it got to a point that, and I'm not even sure what it's about anymore. That
well, yeah.
He had his own stuff to work on, a lot of hurt.
For sure.
Yeah. And I love him very, very much.
Yeah, sure.
And I always have.
Yep. Yeah.
So.
Well, it's interesting what you said. It's for the greater good for him, mm-hmm. and you're okay mm-hmm. with that, knowing that.
Right.
Even though I'm sure, like you said, it's hard.
It's devastating because I have grandchildren that don't know me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do, and I think the reason I have stayed clean and sober is because I do believe that there's a higher power. And I do believe that higher power knows way more than me.
Right.
It knows way more than my older son and is in charge of this.
Right.
And it's got to be serving him in his highest good.
Right. Yeah.
And I've got to believe that it's serving me in my highest good because I have continued to work on myself.
Right.
I have continued to be a good person. I've continued to work in the field. And I've continued to be a good mom to the son that's at home.
For sure.
So he's serving me.
Well, again, that's one of the main reasons why I wanted you on here, because you are a good person. The way you live your life is inspiring. And I know you are working on you. and you've been in this field for a long time, helping people get clean and find help, and you're giving back in such amazing ways. And unfortunately, because of what you've been through, your son right now doesn't want to be a part of that, or for whatever reason, and he's got his reasons, but
you can't.
It's great to see what you're doing.
What I tell people is that if you want to stay clean and sober, you have to be willing to live life on life's terms.
Right.
And there are sometimes consequences. It doesn't matter if it's, a good or bad or right or wrong, but there are sometimes things that you have no control over.
Right. Yeah. Life can be unfair.
And you don't get to decide certain things, and I have chosen to live.
Yeah.
I've chosen to go on. My heart does hurt, but I'm filled with many, many happy times. I'm in an environment here. I love Wasatch Recovery.
Right.
I love working with the people here.
Yeah.
I love the staff here. The reason I love the staff here is because we're real.
Yeah. Yep.
And they get me.
Yes, we do.
And I get to bring people in and help them and continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, this keeps me going.
Right. Well, it's like what it says in step 12 is to give back once you've been through this, and that's what you're doing, and it does fuel you. I really believe that when we give of ourselves to others, we get 100-fold in return.
Right.
Every time. And that's what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
For 33 years you've been, staying strong and doing the things despite these challenges and stuff that you've gone through. Well, and it's like
every time something's happened, I've had a death happen or a divorce or, something that, has happened. I had a time where I had heard my older son got really, really sick and almost died. Nobody told me about it. I mean, that's devastating.
Right.
But, you have to really be willing to let everything else go.
Right. Yep.
And keep going.
Yeah.
And trust.
Yep.
In things that you don't know the outcome.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah.
And that's, if you can do that, you can, I have my sad moments, but let me tell you, I have some very happy, peaceful, serenity, awesome moments because I am willing to do whatever it takes.
Wow. I love that. That's powerful.
Yeah.
And I believe that about you. I see the way, I get to rub shoulders with you every day here at work and to see what you do and how you do things. And it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I love, you're always happy. You're always smiling. You're always, you really are. And that's a beautiful, and that's a compliment for sure.
Well, and it's, I feel my true self a lot.
Yeah.
And it's taken a lot of years, but I feel my true self.
Yeah.
And and when you feel your true self, you can laugh.
Yeah.
And you can be silly and, you can, you can accept things easier.
Sure.
So since I have been clean and sober, I've done things I've never done before. I've been in the industry 27 years. I'm a facilitator of the work by Byron Katie, which is cognitive behavior therapy.
Sure. Yeah.
I did that for myself, to help me.
Exactly.
I love that work.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm not a facilitator under Byron Katie. I went through all of her schools, but I continued to use the process.
Sure.
I run.
Yeah.
Which I've heard you just started getting into running a lot.
Yeah, my kids invited me to do a half marathon, and now I'm hooked.
Yep. So I trail run. I run half marathons. I just got back from New Zealand.
That's right.
In November, late November. We were there for 3 weeks. And I ran the Queenstown International.
Nice.
So we're running on the Alps, and it's just
cool.
like, oh my, and these glaciers.
And you're going, wow.
And I'm just like, this is unreal. Nothing like this would ever happen if I wouldn't have keep moving forward and trust the process.
Yeah. Wow. I love it. That's powerful.
Yeah. I have a beautiful 23-year-old son that goes to school full time, wants to be an attorney. He works for one of the 11 largest attorney firms as a runner. And
that's awesome.
You know, and then but what I guess the message would be that I want to share is that no matter what happens in your life, if you're willing to just sit with it and do whatever you need to do to work through it without harming yourself, it will get better.
Yeah.
And it will pass. And the reward is so much greater.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, the story you just heard and everything I went through, the reward is so much greater.
I love it. Well, it goes with the principle of the greater the darkness, the greater the light.
Correct.
And the darkn's that you've been through, but the light you're experiencing now.
I witnessed it, and I live it, and I know it, and I believe it, and it's there.
I love it. I love it. Well, Melanie, if someone wants to reach out to you who hears this story of yours, who's struggling, who is looking for help, who's looking for guidance, who's either in an abusive relationship or, feels left behind from their own family and this and that, how could they reach out to you? How could they get a hold of you to maybe ask you a question, or if they need to get help or treatment even?
Well, they can call me. I tell people that they can get through to me on my email at melanie@wasatchrecovery.com.
Perfect.
Anytime.
Right.
It's just, melanie@wasatchrecovery.com.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And
great.
If they want to know more about me, they can request my friendship.
Yeah.
On Facebook.
Right.
Through Melanie Tackett.
Perfect.
So
perfect.
I'd be glad to. I love helping people, especially women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that too, because like we were talking about earlier, it seems like we don't hear maybe enough at times from the women who have been through certain things.
We don't.
And that's another reason why I wanted you on here, because your story is so compelling. And again, that darkness and the light you're now experiencing, the contrast between the two. Yeah. I know there's a lot of people and a lot of women who can relate with that.
Yeah.
So I'm urging you, listeners, women who might be struggling or know of someone who's gone through similar to what Melanie has been through, have them listen to this. Have them reach out to Melanie through the email that she just described. And I know Melanie, she will bend over backwards to help. She'll talk to you. She'll visit with you. She'll do whatever. And so please do that, listeners, and reach out to Melanie. And there's so much more to your story, I know, but our time is up.
Yes, it is.
But I want to thank you so much. I'm grateful that I get to work with you. I've heard bits and pieces of your story. This is the first time I heard the bulk of it.
Yeah.
And it really does, touch my heart. And I really admire you 10 times more now.
Oh, thank you.
After hearing what you've been through and to see how you live your life. So I just want to tell you how much I'm grateful for that, Melanie. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You're an awesome man, Todd.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I paid her to say that.
Lots of money.
Yeah. So there you go, listeners, and another amazing Belief Cast. Please share this. Again, thank you for all your support. Again, I want to thank Veracity Networks for their sponsorship. An amazing company, and Drew Peterson, you're amazing for allowing that to happen. And again, Melanie, thank you so much. Please reach out to her, and this will be posted soon. And I'm just so blessed to be a part of this. And
I am too. I mean, this is what it's all about.
Thank you so much.